It's a lot of fun. It's going really well. And my next step, I think, is I gotta finish the last episode. Mm-hmm. And by finish, I mean they're in states of like all of the scenes are accounted for. Some of the scenes are just the slug line of like interior, the apartment, night, and then like a 1-sentence description of what happens in that scene. But that's very few of them are like that. I think the next step is to now take each episode, put the beats on cards, divide them in like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, see how the action flows, see how the pacing is, and then across episodes, make sure like we establish episode 3, it becomes really important that David is a musician. Mm-hmm. So like to make sure from episode 1 that detail is in there, and like making that continuity flow across the whole season. Because it is like I had to just sit down and write stuff to figure out like, oh yeah, so and so is really into ping pong. So I mean that's not part of it, but like to find these situations and then like, oh yeah, I really like that about this character, and that can affect action that happened before or after. So that's the kind of like action happens in time, mm-hmm. but my ideas don't happen in chronological order.
Yeah, when you're talking about how hard it is to actually, I notice, I'm guessing they get done a lot of things, but in the comic book world, there is, I guess it's like the 90s really, when there was a lot more of, like the artist would sort of take over for the writer, mm-hmm. and just start like drawing a story, and I mean, they're not good writers, they're artists, so
yeah.
Their idea of writing a story was like, I'm just going to draw it panel by panel and let the story kind of happen, and I'll figure out, and I'll go back and I'll put in some dialogue or something, sort of like a bastardization. Yeah, that's why so much comic work is so bad, is that it's just kind of like, I'm going to let it flow naturally.
Right.
And so you get to the end of the story and you're like, wait a minute, how come this guy has a gun? I thought at the beginning of the story he doesn't use a gun and that's his main thing. You're like,
right.
Oh, well, as Stanley would say, Marvel no prize.
Yeah.
Turned out when you were in between two panels, this character actually decided that it was really into guns.
Well, and logistical stuff like that is actually really tricky. Because for myself, I don't know if this is how maybe everybody works, but like I do need to imagine the whole day. If we're dealing with the action from morning to night, I have like, where did they go to lunch? What did they do? Or like, for example, we have one episode that takes place out in the countryside, and in the first draft of that, we spend a long time going over how to take a bus out into the countryside, which like on the second pass, I was like, all of that's coming out, because like I needed to think through of like, when they go from doing the laundry, which is what they're doing when the action opens, to getting out in the countryside, I actually wrote through chronologically live all through that action. And then once I had that, I could take out like, we don't need to see them figuring out transportation. They can decide to do it, and then they get there. And then I had them like walking past all the other houses and to see all the chickens. We don't need to see that. Mm-hmm. We need to say, we're going to the countryside, and then their friends in the countryside are like, you're here! Like, you don't need the rest of that. But I did need to think about how that happened, because then there are things like along the way that, you can like maybe I cut out to the part of how they figure out how to take a bus, but that they do need to establish like in this phone call, like, we're gonna have a goat roast, whereas that's like a detail that came out in the bus ride before, in the first draft. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and if you have done this actually in your real life, like you actually figured out how to get that bus, and you took that bus out there and with the phone call, and you passed by those chickens.
Right.
You've all done that. So you have to go back in your memory to remember how you got all there. Whereas in like,
I think that's a perfect illustration of it.
I'm like, as the viewer, but also as the director, I'm like, okay, so you got a great story there. Skip the whole bus.
Right.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do for about like 15 seconds, I'm going to do a montage of
Yeah.
Little music here, and I'm going to show you a chicken in a coop. I'm going to show you a tire of an old bus. And I'm going to show you like an old lady with her kid, and they've got a hen in their lap.
Right.
And now I know exactly what you've gotten together of, like, you're taking a bus out to the countryside.
Yeah. And I think that's like the difference between figuring out what happens and then showing what happens. Like, because I did, when I went to my friend's house out in the countryside, we parked the car far away and had to walk to the house because there's not actually a road that goes to their house. And then, like, we saw all these interesting things along the way. So originally when I wrote that scene, I just copied down what happened. And then, like, rereading it, I could say, like, okay, the chickens are significant, so we need that. But cut the rest of this.
Right, because if you had taken all those details that you had written down, you're either going to write a poem or you're going to give me an Instagram photo album. Like, I don't actually...
Well, it's like your Instagram photo album of 300 photos that are really best served by 10 photos.
Right. But what I don't need for you, from you, is like a 20-minute movie of how you walked down a dirt road and you saw this kind of flower.
Right, and again, that's the beauty of film, is that you can just have like a transition shot of the dirt path and then we're there. Like, we don't actually have to walk on it and have a conversation.
And if you and your whole crew are able to put that in a way that's moving to the viewer, then maybe that viewer will actually go out there someday and visit themselves. Like, I can't actually tell you what it's like to be there, which I know is what anyone, like, oh, I just had this amazing dream. Please don't tell me. I don't want to know. Like, let me have that one myself.